I'm thrilled to hear about the trip to Hungary because it's one of those places in Europe that has not gone the way of the far left.
It is the promised land, Governor. It was a real pleasure to go visit. And what coincided with this visit was not just a speech and an opportunity to check out Budapest, see what a non-liberal democracy looks like, but this translation came out. And the translation took about as long as it took me to write the book, and that was about 5 seconds. But I'm just so pleased that the message of my book, Reasons to Vote for Democrats, A Comprehensive Guide, could now make it not only to an American audience, but to a global audience as well.
To those who are maybe unaware, the book, Reasons to Vote for Democrats, it's a pretty thick book, but it's filled with empty pages.
It's totally empty. I can't quite pronounce the title of the translation. It's Miert Asfatzung Libera Nyakoknya. I can't quite get it out, but I can pronounce the rest of the book. It's the first translation, actually, in the history of publishing where the translation is identical to the original work.
That is history in the making right there. What was your impression of the Prime Minister and his leadership of Hungary? Because he's been controversial, particularly to the American left. They hate him.
They hate him. He's very controversial to the New York Times, and he's very popular with the Hungarian people and everyone who goes to visit. I'm really impressed by Prime Minister Orbán and the entire government there. When I went to visit, I was warned beforehand that Hungary was a threat to democracy.
A threat.
A threat.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, well, why is Hungary a threat to democracy? And then I looked it up in the New York Times. And the reason that Hungary is a threat to democracy is because the people elected a conservative.
Well, that is definitely a threat to democracy.
When the people have their voices heard in their government, that is very dangerous to democracy if the way that they make their voices heard is to reject liberalism.
You leaned left through a lot of your early life, and then I don't know if it was an epiphany or if it was sort of a slow rise to kind of seeing the light and getting involved in a more conservative approach. How did that happen for you?
Well, I was raised by a libertarian objectivist. My mother studied under Ayn Rand, and she was a textbook publisher for W.W. Norton. So I was actually raised in a very freedom, individualistic, valuing family.
Okay.
So I wasn't very left-leaning, but because I started working in Hollywood when I was 7 years old, it was my first professional acting job, my entire life was left-wing, basically.
Yeah.
Every job that I did, every single one of my friends was on the left. The work that I did was supporting leftist values. And I knew that it was very different than the things that I had been, raised supporting and valuing and trying to live my own life in accordance to. And so it just got to a point where I could no longer work in that industry because I felt like I was compromising everything that I knew. I made the decision that I did not want to pursue a lifelong career in entertainment. I had done it as a child. I was a child actor, somehow made it out alive and with a level head.
And not a lot of people do. I mean,
yes.
Sometimes people are really ruined by that experience.
I was talking about this earlier today with a couple of coworkers, actually, but it is a very turbulent industry, especially for the creatives that are involved. You get whipped around a lot. You have no control over, and you have no autonomy over really any of the projects that you do, where you go, where you're located. In one day, you could be in Los Angeles, and 3 days later, they're sending you to Vancouver to film something. At one point, I was doing a season 2 of a show that I was on that ended up getting canceled, but they were planning on shooting it in Prague. So it was like, okay, my life is going to be at 15, uprooted and have to move to Prague. You get no say really in it, because if you sign on, then you're in. And you really do get whipped around. You get chewed up and spit out, especially if you dissent from any of their narrative.
Before you landed at the Daily Wire, you did some work with my dear friend Dennis Prager at PragerU. I think it's one of the greatest things that's out there in the public square today.
Yes.
How big of an influence was Dennis Prager and the experience of putting videos together with PragerU?
It was huge. I joined PragerU's youth organization, or high school and college group, which is called Prager Force, during the middle of COVID because I had been outed as a conservative at UCLA. I was asked to leave my sorority.
Really?
Yes, because it was Kappa Delta, which is Amy Coney Barrett's former sorority. So when she was appointed to the Supreme Court by President Trump, during our rush, we were given a script basically to say we do not agree with Amy Coney Barrett. We understand that our sorority is under a lot of scrutiny right now. We don't agree. We support the women's right to choose, like all of this stuff. We don't agree with her. And then we had to sign a petition to have her stripped of her sorority letters, basically.
Good heavens.
And I said, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And people had already started catching on that I wasn't agreeing. And then at the same time, I was sort of slowly outed to the people that I was living with, my college roommates. It got so aggressive. I had violent threats against, Trump supporters, other conservatives saying that they would be fine if they ran over a conservative and they died, that sort of thing.
Don't you love the love and diversity and tolerance?
Yeah, the
it's all about it, yeah.
And I realized that that was not going to be an environment that I could live in anymore, so I moved back home. My family was in Los Angeles at the time, so I finished up my UCLA academic career, living at home during COVID. I felt incredibly isolated. I had, kind of had to remove myself from a lot of social situations because of, politics and COVID. And so I went to PragerU basically begging for some kind of conservative and political home in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Because at the time, Daily Wire was about to leave. Breitbart had already moved. Dave Rubin was leaving. And it was just PragerU in Los Angeles. And they took me under their wing. I started making videos for them. Got to know Dennis, went on his show a couple of times. And they were incredibly instrumental in giving me the confidence and the tools that I needed in order to start speaking out, to have a voice on social media. And then started writing articles for the Foundation for Economic Education. I joined forces with Young Americans for Liberty and joined their team for a bit, which then, turned into Daily Wire reaching out to me, asking me if I wanted to move here and host a show for them.
Tell me, is there hope that other young people, Generation Z, are going to sort of wake up and see that socialism doesn't work? Are we destined to have that generation grow up and just say, everything that we've ever been a part of in America is wrong?
I don't think so. I think that there is hope. So my demographics on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, I think I'm like 38 to 40% 18 to 24 is my age range, which is huge.
Yeah.
Like traditional YouTube channels, it usually stems older, especially in conservative media, it is usually older audiences. So that is a large portion of young people. The other thing that is interesting is that when I look at my comments and I look at the demographics of who is watching and subscribing to my channel, a large portion are not conservatives. And they comment and they'll DM me and they'll say, you know what, I'm more of a centrist, or I'm a liberal, but things are kind of confusing and you're providing common sense. Whether or not they are fully coming over to the conservative side, it's a lot of people like Joe Rogan and Tulsi Gabbard and Tim Pool, and these people that are disgruntled liberals, basically. That, might still have left-leaning, ideas on some things, but they are realizing that 1%, the very radical, the loud progressive left, that they're insane.
Yeah.
And are finally seeing, to put it lightly.
It's the truth.
Yes.
It is.
They are in the entire liberal side of this country, and the Democrats, and especially the politicians, are so scared of that 1% because they are so loud, because they are, like I said, insane, and they worry that, they're going to destroy their reputation, so they have to bend a knee to them. And finally, I think the mainstream public is waking up and realizing, oh my God, what am I subscribing to? This is crazy.
Yeah.
2-year-olds are changing their gender? No.
They are drugging and mutilating children. In some states, girls as young as 13 are getting double mastectomies. These are physically healthy girls who are having their breasts chopped off because they say that they want to be boys. And of course, what makes this so deranged and disgusting and evil that they're doing this to kids is that if that same 13 or 14 or 15-year-old girl said, I want to get a tattoo, or I want to buy a gun, or I want to go to a rated R movie, I want to buy alcohol, any of that stuff, we would all, the government would say, everybody would say, well, you can't do that. You're too young to make that decision. And yet a child says that supposedly they want to alter their bodies forever. And we've got these so-called gender-affirming doctors who are right there to do that. And there's a lot behind it. One thing we get into in the film is that there's a real profit motive here. There is billions of dollars at stake. And that's part of the story.
For the medical community and the drug companies, where does the money to be made?
Big pharma, the surgeons, therapists, counselors, the doctors who give the hormone pills, the so-called puberty blockers, which they say are temporary and reversible, but they are neither of those things. These are drugs, by the way, in particular Lupron, we talk about in the film. is a drug that is a chemical castration drug. They give it to sex offenders to chemically castrate them. And we give that now to children, to 12 and 13-year-old
12
children.
and 13.
Right. So it's neither temporary nor reversible. A lot of money, though. And here's the thing. So you got a 6-year-old boy who is confused about his gender. Either you could say to the boy, well, you're really a boy, and that's what you are, and that's a wonderful thing, and that'll be it, and that's what you should say, but there's no money in that. So if, on the other hand, you bring him to a therapist, and the therapist says, oh, well, then you're really a girl. Now that child, to the therapists and counselors and doctors and surgeons, is worth millions of dollars through the rest of his life. And I think that is a big part of the story.
Ben, you talk about the 3 steps that America is being destroyed in or by. Let's talk about those 3 steps. What are they, and how is that destroying America?
So in order to understand what exactly is being destroyed, we have to understand what is supposed to unite us, or what originally brought America together. And that was 3 things: a shared philosophy, a shared culture, and a shared history. The philosophy of the United States was embodied in the Declaration of Independence, the idea that all men are created equal, endowed by that creator with certain inalienable rights, and that government was instituted in order to protect those rights, a limited government with limited powers designed not to invade those rights. That was the shared creedal philosophy of the United States. We were all supposed to hold that in common. That doesn't mean that it was perfectly applied. Obviously, it was not. But the history of the United States, the other shared feature of the United States, is a history in which we try to strive for the fulfillment of those founding principles, and we do better at that over time, increasingly spreading the application of those principles to more and more people, not just at home, but also abroad, and that is the glory of the United States. And then we have a shared culture, a culture that values social institutions like the family, that values church, that values a spirit of entrepreneurialism and adventure. And all 3 of those elements of America that used to unify us, the philosophy, the history, and the culture, all 3 of those are being destroyed right now, actively undermined by a group of people I've called disintegrationists. The disintegrationist philosophy believes that America is not in fact free, that America is merely racist and evil, and that all of the founding ideals are actually backward, that all men should not be equal before the law, that we have to determine via group identity whether people are treated in a particular way or not, that the government should not be limited in any way, that rights don't spring from God and don't pre-exist government. The same group of people believe that American history is the unending story of evil and oppression, this sort of the 1619 Project view of America, now being taught in your public schools. And then finally, they believe that the culture of America is wrong. The churches and families are obstacles to ultimate change in the United States and can be dispensed with safely. Government should override them, in fact, and that a culture of adventure and entrepreneurialism, a culture that says that you're owed nothing except the adventure itself, that is a bad culture and needs to be overthrown by a culture of entitlement.
I mean, I don't think anybody could really argue what you have just described that's happening to America. You talked about the disintegrationists, but who are these people? And exactly where are they coming from, and what is their motivation in wanting to destroy America? I mean, do we have names? Do we have places? I guess the question, who the heck are these folks?
There's a long history. There's a long history of people in the United States believing that the creedal founding philosophy of the United States was not true. I mean, there were secessionists prior to the Civil War and during the Civil War who believed that basically America was just an agglomeration of various interest groups, and therefore that when those interest groups no longer agreed, then some could go their separate ways. There are progressives in the early 20th century who believed that rights don't spring from God, they come from government, and that government should be empowered to simply give people what they need, and that people at the top of government should simply use whatever power was at their disposal in order to do so. There are people today, I would say that there are many members of the Black Lives Matter movement who believe that the United States was founded in cruelty and evil, and that the only way to fight that cruelty and evil is to overthrow all these systems of repression that are contained in the Constitution of the United States, that basic American freedoms, things we hold dear like freedom of speech or freedom to own property, that these things are actually the threat to the possibility of the utopian future.
If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I hope you will now. The button is just below this video, and there's a little bell next to it. If you click on those, YouTube will reluctantly start letting you know when we've got a new video uploaded.